Hello everyone, welcome to the third season of Design Inspired Talks. I'm Kadambari Sahu, your host, founder of Design Inspire platform and SVP Design at ValueLabs. Design Inspire is an initiative to connect designers across the global design community, and Design Inspire Talks is a presentation and discussion series with passionate, innovative, and inspiring designers. It dives deep into their passion, inspiration, and what makes them go. It is an effort to understand how they are navigating their career path and how they are investing their creative energies. We believe hearing their bold moves and inspiring stories will ignite interest and inspire the next generation of budding designers across the globe. So let's go forward with our guest today, Shamik Ray. Shamik Ray is a design leader at Spotify, where he helps create relevant, accessible, and joyful audio products that reach millions of listeners around the world. His expertise lies in product design and strategy, built over a career spanning startup, banks, and tech companies. He is passionate about connecting his diverse interest in technology, design, philosophy, and leadership into a well-crafted products and building happy teams along the way. He's a dad of two little humans, an amateur music maker, and a visiting faculty member of the CIID Summer School in Costa Rica, Japan, India, and Denmark. Hi Shamik, how are you doing today?
Thrilled to be here, Kadambari. So happy to be here. I'm good, and I'm grateful to you and the team for having me today. And I can't wait to speak to all of you.
Oh, awesome. So the format of the talk would be the first 20 minutes are your presentation where you can choose any topic and talk about it. And next we'll discuss about your design journey. So let's go forward, very eagerly awaiting to see your
Cool.
presentation.
Hello, everyone. I'm doing this specific topic for the first time. So yeah, take it with a grain of salt. There might be some rough edges here and there, but I feel this is the perfect audience to share this with. So I want to talk to you about an aspect, a dimension of design, which we don't often talk about because we're talking about the big, shiny, glorious things. And I call it designing playfully. And really, I'm betting a lot of you in this call, or generally have heard about this quote from Pablo Picasso, that every child is an artist. The problem is how to remain an artist once you grow up. And this quote is profound. But the problem with this quote is you hear this quote when you become an adult, which means that you then have to think about how can I kind of rebirth or rekindle the child in me. And for me personally, I had heard this quote long back. And very recently, when I became a father, that's when I fully started understanding the profoundness and the depth of what Pablo Picasso really means here. And that kind of set in motion this whole chain of thoughts and reflection and looking back at my career and trying to find some kind of a golden thread between all the pointless, playful, wacky, kind of trivial things, or the things I consider that way that I had done, which is not in my portfolio. It's not something I kind of talk about loudly in conferences, but I think they also make me who I am. And I want to share some of those things with you today and see if there are any takeaways, any inspiration, any learnings that we can all take and embrace in our practices. So this is my son. His name is Ved. He's 2.5 years old. We live in Stockholm, and he loves to play with sand. That's his thing. And I think during the pandemic, as he was, a pandemic child, so this was one of our kind of happy places. I knew that if I took him to the sand pit, he would be happy. He would keep playing. It would also mean that me and his mother would have a little moment for ourselves. And I think he's not unique. A lot of kids love to play with sands, and it's a lot of fun seeing them, watching them from the outside. And what exactly are they trying to do? Are they kind of following any rules, or is it all random? What I see when I observe Ved from the side is that he can spend hours just shoveling sand. Sometimes it feels like he's filling sand in these little trucks, or he's putting them inside buckets and making some things that look like castles or stuff. But often he's just doing pointless things, like just throwing up the sand in the air, or just like taking sand from one point to the other, only to bring it back to the same place. So I got really curious, and I started looking at some studies which scientists had done on children and sand, and I was actually blown away. Because what I learned is playing in sand has at least 5 different benefits for kids. It helps build sensory development, physical development. Apparently, it helps build creativity and imagination. If you play in the sand with other kids, it also helps build some social and language skills. And also it helps boost immunity. So what is apparently play for a little child has a much, much deeper impact on him or her, and it stays with them through the course of their lives. So that kind of got me reflecting that when have I actually done things like this in my career where it felt like I was not following any rules, I was just doing pointless stuff, and I didn't even know what it all meant at that time, but maybe I know a little bit now when I look back. So yeah, that's what I want to focus on. But before I get into the body of the presentation, I want to start with defining a few things. So this talk is about play, and I think there are pretty much 2 kinds of games that we are all playing in the world, whether it's in the world of business, in careers, in our lives, in society, in professional fields. And this is based off the work of someone called James B. Cars, and he's written an amazingly insightful book on this called Finite and Infinite Games. And I want to take out some of the best ideas from that book and kind of see how that helps us frame some of these things. So he talks about finite games as being games where the purpose is to win. And I think most games that we think of when we think games like football or cricket or boxing or even I guess in the world of business, sometimes we talk about winning and competitive advantage and like how can we win market share. So the purpose is winning. There's the other kind of game, which is infinite games, where the purpose is to continue playing the game. So the goal isn't winning, is to just perpetuate the game. Finite games happen within boundaries. So usually there's a ring, there's a field, there is some kind of a demarcated area, a chessboard where the action is taking place. Infinite games are playing with the boundaries. So you're constantly trying to redefine what the playing field is, and you're actually trying to push the boundaries of whatever the game it is you're playing. Finite games are a lot about replication, meaning you look at the past, you see what was successful, what were some successful strategies, gameplays, tactics, and you try to kind of replicate that for future instances. Infinite games are actually about creativity, and you may look a little bit at the past, but you're looking more at the present and the future, and you're really trying to find new angles, new dimensions of playing. Finite games sometimes only include a select group of people. So it's very much like you're in the game or you're out of the game, right? So even if we wanted, we couldn't join the IPL team now and start playing for India, even if we might be very good in cricket. Infinite games, on the other hand, are actually about including others in. If you see a bunch of kids playing in a park, I think there it's mostly a combination of finite and infinite, depending on the group and the place you're in. Sometimes they may not let you play with you, but sometimes you might make new friends while playing with others. Or if you're in the beach and you see like one kid playing with sand, suddenly like 2 or 3 other kids can come together and make their own game out of it. And finally, I think in finite games, there is this search for power. So players seek power. When you win, you become more powerful. But infinite games are less about power and more about strength. And I think there's a difference between power and strength. And hopefully I can cover a little bit of that. So really, as I said, the modern world tends to push us a lot towards finite games. I think examinations, marks, scores, awards, accolades, metrics, a lot of them really are in that realm. But today, what I want to talk to you about is some of the aspects of infinite games that we can start doing more of, or practicing more thoughtfully and more deliberately in our practice. So yeah, this talk is a little bit more about the right column. And I want to look back a little bit and think about times when some of these things have kind of either happened by choice, or I just happened to be there and things happened to me, which in hindsight shaped who I am. So firstly, I want to take you back to 2008. Yes, I love eating cupcakes. So you'll see a lot of cupcakes in this presentation. So this was when I took my first steps into design, and it was, let's just say, a time of great confusion because for me, design was a little bit of a happy accident. I'll tell you more when we do Q&A. And initially, a lot of my work was about trying to make sense of things like materials, shapes, forms, just kind of looking at things like plaster or clay. And I did a bit of an industrial design course, which is why when I say material, it's actually hardware, stuff like this. Or like learning how certain curves can invoke certain emotions. And it never started with this idea of eventually having to build something. It was all about exploring the material. And I think I was looking at my previous work, and I have like folders upon folders of these mysterious shapes. And then at the end of it, sometimes this is an example of where we did something with those shapes and built like this concept webcam, but often they would just be shapes. And I didn't know what to do with these photos and where to put these in my portfolio, because it felt like, I mean, I was not following much of a process. There was no clear impact. There was just like this idea of noodling around with material. And I think that idea of noodling around with material and playing with stuff continued, but the materials changed. At some point, so this strange looking contraption was actually my final project. And I took a very different approach than like a double diamond or like a 5-step design process, which, probably do more now. But I got really curious about sound and music and code. And I started putting those things together and building these kind of software, synthesizers and stuff. So this is just an example of me playing with this programming language called Pure Data and like connecting things together and having some sound play in the end, which, yes, it invoked some kind of interactivity and emotions. And I think this was kind of the heights of my confused state as a designer, because as a final project, really, it was semi-successful. My professor said that my research was a bit weak and my prototype kind of didn't work at the demo, but I'm sure that has happened to a lot of you where the prototype doesn't work in the demo. But what this project did was it took my curiosities in a whole new direction. And fast forward a few years from 2008, this was probably 2011, 2013, after like working as a UX designer for a couple of years, I decided that I wanted to go a bit deeper into the craft. And I hadn't really played for 2 years, because for 2 years I was doing very kind of adult projects, like making wireframes and following a process and like delivering things, and that was fine, but I lacked that sense of play. So I went to Denmark, and we did this course on interaction design. And luckily, that was more inviting for play. And during that course, me and a classmate of mine called Luke, we really started playing with cameras. And kind of the course was very heavy on documentation and creating videos and stuff. So we were always having a camera with us. But for one of the projects, what we did was we tried to see that, can we use a camera to photograph something that was invisible to the human eye? And we built this kind of rig where we kind of took the camera, used long exposure photography, and used a light source to map electromagnetic fields on top of different electronic gadgets like tape recorders and laptops. And again, like no user research or no straightforward brief. But when we created this, it kind of blew up. And before we knew, this was getting picked up by like Wired and I don't know, Gizmodo. And if you search for it in Google, like you'll see these strange looking alien shapes. The thing is, we never tried to build anything with the intent of going viral or like something that will invoke whatever, like imagination and go through the roof. We were just curious and playing with cameras. We did end up with something which you could say was beautiful at some level, but this was not in the plan. This was not the master plan. But what also happened is that once we spent more time with the project and really saw that there was so much curiosity for it in the world and everyone wanted to know how we had done it, we thought maybe we should write a paper, right? And we did publish a paper. But I kind of giggle a little bit at this project when I look back and I look at the title of this, which feels like we are like some, I don't know, like scientists doing cutting edge science, like visualizing electromagnetic fields, an approach to visual data representation and the discussion of invisible phenomena. Hell no, that was not what we were trying to do. We were trying to play and have fun. And this is what happened. So the outcome of play can be new knowledge, and that's a good thing, but doesn't have to be the goal necessarily. So yeah, I've always been fascinated with technology. And after cameras, I kind of moved a little bit to start playing with web technologies. And this was probably in 2014, 13, 14. And yeah, I went deep into the rabbit hole. And at that time, I didn't really have a job. I was kind of between being a student and finding a job. So it was kind of in that strange place in between where I was trying to apply to a lot of places. And in the night, I was just like hacking on the browser. And then one day I just built this thing. I just had this idea in the shower called, what if like, there was so much romanticism and so much poeticness about writing letters in the past, right? You took a piece of paper, you took out your favorite fountain pen and you wrote something and you poured your emotions on it. And even if you wanted to change something, you couldn't really erase, like you had to strike it out or you had to like erase it. And the reader of the letter would actually find a lot of meaning even in the mistakes. Like if I had struck something out, there's no way I can hide that. So I kind of built that on the browser using my limited coding skills. So it's called the Human Mail. It's a mail composer, which is inspired by writing letters. And I use this kind of text-to-speech thing. So you could like speak and it would just keep writing in this pen-like font, but you can't delete anything. So you can only like strike through or erase. And yeah, I showed it to a few friends. They were like, this is cool. And then I had an interview lined up. So I went there, I showed them all my portfolio pieces. And then I just thought, let me also show them this because it's kind of, who knows, they might like it. Later on, I realized it was actually this project which got me hired because the person who was in my portfolio review happened to be like someone who really believed in making and like not just knowing the theory, but someone who can actually build things. So again, this was not by choice or a plan. This happened because I was just playing and things just sometimes fall in place. So I got hired, which is why this cupcake is spinning much faster because, my life was also in motion. Now I moved to London. This was my new office. It's a skyscraper. It felt like, I had arrived. And it also felt like, okay, this is it. Now I should probably stop playing and get serious and do some real projects for once. But, old habits die hard. So even in a bank, I found a group of people who were quite playful. One of them was this person who was leading, this was 2014. So things like blockchain and crypto were super niche. No one knew about them. But that was the point because no one knew about them. The first kind of port of call was how do you make the possibilities of things like blockchain more accessible and make it a story that a lot of people can follow internally. So I started playing with animation and created a film. We created this Pixar-like film on like our blockchain strategy in 2014. This was unexpected. Everyone thought we would make a deck or we would make some kind of posters, some strategy white paper. We made an animation film. And yeah, it definitely played a role. The CEO saw this. We also built a new currency for investing in ideas. Again, this came as like an idea in just like while having beers with colleagues that we should probably create some money which people can use to invest in ideas. And we just did it. So that kind of brings me a little bit to today. And I think a few things have happened since then. play is something I still believe in. However, as I've kind of started looking more into, instead of doing these hack projects myself, I now look at my teams and try to build teams and like try to help, bring leadership to things. I've had to adapt my ways of playing slightly. And in a way, I'm kind of thankful that I'm in a place like Spotify, where if you follow this GIF, playful is actually one of our company values. But I love the articulation of that. It says we don't take ourselves too seriously. And that, I think, is at the core of play. And I also think that playful and all these other values that are described here, like innovative or sincere or passionate, collaborative, they're all interconnected. Being playful is these things, and they can actually lead you to be more innovative, be more collaborative, and of course, be more passionate. As a leader, you're also setting up the tone and the environment in which great things happen. Especially during the pandemic, I realized, or we realized in our leadership team, that this is how our meetings used to look before, like big docs full of who's attending, what are the action items, who's the owners, great. But it lacked soul. It lacked that sense of belonging. And we decided that we should tear up these docs and change the format, use a more visual thing, have fun, take ourselves less seriously. And this is how our meeting, this is actually the design managers meeting. This is a screenshot. I've scribbled out the confidential bits, but this is how our meetings look like today. It is more playful. And it's about changing the playing field, because when you change the playing field, new behaviors and new things emerge. It doesn't mean that being playful and being productive can't coexist. Often the criticism is that, oh, these, design is this kind of fun-loving, whatever, like rebellious bunch of people, and they're just like doing wishy-washy things. No, I beg to differ, and I would strongly disagree, because this is how great things get created, and play can be powerful. And I think essentially, a lot of what happens in a company is how leaders behave. So if leaders are leading by example, and you make playfulness a behavior and almost an expectation in what you do, I actually believe we can do great things. So as Kadambari mentioned, I also try to find time sometimes to teach. And that's a great avenue for play, because students are great. They don't have all the worries of corporates, and they can break so many rules and get away with it. So this is an example I pulled from one of my student work, or some work that my students did. They wanted to build a prototype video, and they didn't have a bed. So this is how they made their bed. At least for the video, they kind of faked the whole thing. They used a wall, and they put like cutouts of pillows and an alarm clock. And this is a perfectly legit bed. And I think this is an example of what imagination can do. Knowledge takes you from A to B, imagination takes you everywhere. And this is an example of that. And just to wrap things up, I think like play is something that a few companies understand the soul of it, right? Not just as this buzzwordy thing and doing like painting the reception yellow, or like having beanbags, not that kind of play, but like in its deepest level, what is play and what can it bring? What is the new story it can bring to business? So I took Lego as an example, and they have been in the business of play for more than 100 years. They've built amazing products. They also have this course called the Lego Serious Play Method. And this is about using Legos in the context of business. And you can get this kit, and you can like, by the way, this is not an affiliate link, so I'm not getting paid to say this, but I actually think this works. I'm not an influencer yet, so I just wanted to put that disclaimer out yet. This is amazing, because it kind of forces you to go beyond the obvious ways of doing business, where there's a certain kind of power structure and certain kinds of communication that are happening in a room. Well, if you put play into the mix, it kind of breaks things up and makes space for new voices to be heard and new ideas to be generated. So yeah, check this out. And I want to end with 3 takeaways, or 3 things which I believe play allows for. So firstly, play brings joy. I think there's a lot of science behind this, that when you play, your stress levels go down, a lot of your happy hormones flood your system. When that happens, you're just a much better human being. You're a much better colleague, and you're a much better designer if you're in that state of joy. Play leads to creativity, right? Those pointless things, those goofy things actually sometimes help connect certain dots, certain ideas, which otherwise wouldn't connect if you just followed a process. And if creative problem solving is really the currency of design, and that's what gets the world going around, then I feel play is an essential component of how we should be showing up as designers. And thirdly, as I talked about it, the infinite game of design is not a single player game, it's a multiplayer game. And the best way to create a sense of belonging is not really by giving people a pep talk. It's by inviting them to play with you and build something together. So if there's only one message that you want to take away from this talk today, it's this: go play. Thank you.
Great. This was really great talk. I remember, I had gone to Singapore, I think, for National Design Center, and I had loved this line which was there, and it said, "Play is the highest form of research."
Yeah.
Which I thought, it really connected well. And what you also talked about, that double diamond method of IDEO, which now is so prevalent. It is almost getting synonymous, or it is synonymous with design right now. Like if you say, okay, I'm designing, people automatically define, all those 5 double diamond things and all. And I always feel that, even when I was a student, or I was, creating, it was always this sense of exploring and, hacking and prototyping and thinking by making. All those things are still, something which are there, but I think, always there are different methods to be explored. I hope people do explore different methodology rather than just staying with one sort of framework and one sort of way. So really amazing talk. I totally loved it, Shamik, and I'm sure even people sort of enjoyed it a lot. Not only I think the presentation was about play, but we could see a lot of fun elements on your, it was embodied in that sense.
I mean, it would be quite hypocritic to just use a
Yeah.
Google Slides template and give you a talk on play without
Yeah,
being.
yeah. So true, so true. We'll move to the next now part of the show, which is about discussion with you on your life journey and things like that. So first, I would you talked about a little bit about yourself, but would want to know more about you. How would you define yourself or introduce yourself in that sense?
Tough one. So yeah, I was born and raised in India. I always wanted to be an engineer, like a lot of Indian kids of my generation, the
Me too.
generation before, and the generation after, and will be forever. However, there was a part of me which was always drawn towards creativity and art and poetry. And so I say the front pages of my notebook were maths, and the last 2 or 3 pages were the real me, the scribbles, the things I wrote. And design felt like a way which could help me connect the front pages of my notebook and the last pages of my notebook into one kind of activity, which would have a bit of a career path and help me kind of take care of myself and others around me. So that's where I started my journey in design. It took a while for me to fully internalize what design meant and what I wanted to do with it. But I think I've been a designer for about 15 years now, if you take like studies and work and all the other things I've done in between. And I feel deep inside, even though my titles have changed, and right now I've been doing more of like design leadership, but like that's the core, that's the soul, and that's where I get a lot of my strength from. And I've lived now in 3 or 4 places. Most recently, I'm in Stockholm, where I'm working for Spotify. Family's here now, and I just love to make things outside of the 4 walls of my job as well.
Great. I also wanted to understand, you did talk about the earlier awareness of you of choosing a career was torn between engineering and this whole thing of as you in your own words, as you said, connecting between the first pages and the last pages. So when did you consciously decide to become a designer? Like, how did that happen?
So yeah, exactly. So it's a fun story.
Mm-hmm.
I think I became a designer by accident, but after that it became a plan.
Mm-hmm.
Happened was like all aspiring engineers, I worked very hard at like cracking competitive exams. I wanted to go to IIT. I mean, what else, right? And I got through IIT. What happened is I wasn't getting any engineering disciplines, but I was
Uh-huh.
getting design. Like, so the choice was, do I want to be an engineer or
Uh-huh.
do I want to be in an IIT and just explore this?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, let's explore this. I can always try to switch after a year because they have this whole system of like branch changes and all that. You're probably familiar. I think that first year was kind of critical, and that first year is what flipped me because that it brought me very close contact with design students and design professors and seeing like how the field operated and what was in there. And I think that's when the it kind of clicked for me that design is not just purely artsy stuff. It's a lot of it's the amalgamation of like technology and humanities and arts and business, and it kind of spoke to me. It resonated with someone who's always found themselves a bit hard to like define, and it's also the source of my biggest insecurities. Like I feel I like everything. I'm so like generalistic, and yeah, but that's kind of what happened. That's how I made my or took my first steps in design. But having spent some time, I realized that yeah, this can actually be good. And the field is so dynamic. Every 2 3 years, things change, and there are new opportunities, and you just keep riding the waves. And yeah, stay
You,
curious, eyes wide open.
you've stayed in many different places, like currently Stockholm, India, and many more. Can you talk about some of the intercultural experiences that you have and some of your living and working experiences across the globe?
Yeah. Um, so I've lived as a student in Denmark mostly. I also did like a year of freelance. This is outside of India. I've so far I think I've still spent the majority of my time in India, like till the age of 2022, which means that that still shapes the biggest portions of who I am and my core and my values. A lot of those things. Um, and yeah, since then the UK, Denmark, and Denmark and Sweden.
Yeah.
I think the thing I've picked up most is two things, right? One is awareness about the world, and the second is awareness about yourself. And I think those two combined will give you a bit of a 360 picture of where do you want to take this, right? So awareness about the world. I think the scene in India is amazing right now. From a design standpoint, it's grown exponentially in the last 10 years. When we were getting out of college, it was still just getting started. And you could kind of name the good places which hired designers, and there were a few like important designers in the country. So there was always this pull of like going out and exploring and exposing yourself to more things, more culture, more knowledge, more networks. So that's kind of what took me to Denmark. And I think that I still feel very lucky to have done that. Same with London. Each place has its unique characteristics. It's not just the design industry, it's just like I think the vibe of a place which can unknowingly shape you and your personality and also your practice. I saw a deep sense of like human-centeredness in Scandinavia, so places like Denmark and Sweden. And it's hard to articulate, but even the smallest things, like the little ramp they have on the roads so that it's super accessible, or like the way little knobs and handles and things, like everyday objects are shaped with so much care for the human who's going to be using it, was quite amazing. And I only wish like we we took that attention to detail and that human-centeredness, or I took it back when I went back to India stuff. And then the other thing is awareness about yourself. I think the way to put it is that to grow, you have to leave the familiar behind. And even within India, I think I left home after 10th to do my higher education in a different city. I left India for Denmark beginning to leave my job and go back to study. So at every stage, like you're leaving behind what's comfortable and familiar and trying to find like some new growth. And that is and I think when you put yourself through that, then you also learn a lot about yourself. Who are you as a person? What actually energizes you? What drains you? What are the things you never thought you could do, but you actually can? That is sometimes hard to figure out when you're just like in the everyday and you're in your comfort zone. So I would say those are the main things.
Yeah, I think I totally sort of resonated with you when you talked about these different cultural places, and how like just a few like months back, even I had gone to Finland, and the public spaces and things like that, and even like I think different perspectives, right? Going to different places and studying and or doing there is quite nice. Now you have like functioned, or you have been in the space where you were like a design student, you transitioned into freelancer, you did like a corporate job, and then in so many different areas, and currently a design leader. So there's like a lot of transition, right? I see, as a design student, as a designer, as a design leader. Could you talk about like different maybe different things that you did, or like transitions that you had to take to be these three? And I think you went back for it also, right? Like in terms of
Course.
practices and things like that.
Yeah. Okay. What's a good way to answer this question? I'll focus maybe on some of the key transitions and like some reflections I have about what really changed, right? What was the change?
Yeah.
And I think the big transition which a lot of us make at some point in our careers is when we go from the whole academic setup, students, to like our first job, and we become like a professional. That's one transition. Usually in the beginning, you're an individual contributor, and then you might become a leader at some point. The big difference between, or the big transition between student to academic, I think, is pretty much two things. And again, those two things, I speak from my experience, so I'm happy to be for that to be built up by others with different experiences. I think one thing is time, and the second is accountability. Meaning, when you're a student, things are usually quite fast paced, like semesters and projects and modules and coursework, and there's a certain pace to being a student. And once you're done with the project, you're done. You move on to the next thing. Now, I've worked mostly in product companies, at least in the jobs which I have had so far. And I think the thing that the biggest change for me was staying much longer with with a project, with a product, with an idea, and taking things to the finish line, right? And that can be a multi-quarter, multi-year thing. There can be so much iteration. There's a lot of data, and like you work with a lot of experts who are telling you what exactly is happening with your product, what is happening, are users really like getting value out of it, what will you do with that data, how will you iterate and all that. So I think when you stay longer with a project or a product, you probably are able to go much deeper. And I think the second thing is this sense of accountability, right? Like as a professional, it's not just you're not just accountable for delivering your own project, or not just to your professor for grades. Like you're accountable to your company, of course, to yourself, your team, but also to the people you're serving, your customers, your users. And I think that is important to understand. And I think kind of taking on, and when I say responsibility here, I don't really mean that in a heavy-handed way, but like that is really the growth that happens when you go from being a student to a professional. You start getting comfortable taking responsibility, and once you start doing these things, you build on not just like your design muscles, but a lot of other muscles. You start getting more well-rounded as a design practitioner. A lot of those things can feel boring, like having project plans or like doing planning and like doing follow-up and managing stakeholders and all those things. But they're essential. That's it's always something you'll need in life, in careers and other life. The next big transition is when you start going from IC to leadership. And for me, I feel like I spent a good chunk of my career as an individual contributor, as a craftsperson, growing, doing different things, growing breadth and depth in a way. I think what happens with the leadership changes, again, a few things. You have to go from becoming someone who is adding to things to someone who is multiplying things, right? So you become a multiplier, from additive to multiplicative. That is one transition. So your behavior, the values and the expectations and the culture you set in a team is not just going to affect you, it's going to affect the whole team, and the team is going to affect the whole company. So you're a multiplier. Second thing that happens is your work starts becoming going from deterministic to probabilistic. What I mean by that is, let's say you're a visual designer. A lot of your work is about mastering the craft and really knowing kind of, you know, through repetition, through practice, through, refining of your craft, that when you take certain decisions, let's say you say, let's make the button bigger, or let's use this color, or let's use this typography. Um, your actions and the outcome, or like what happens, like you get much quicker feedback of your actions. Like you see that changing on the screen, or you might get some feedback from someone else who's passing by that, hey, that looks good. So in a way, most decisions are deterministic, and you kind of start understanding which are good design decisions and which are not so good design decisions. I think with leadership, because there's just so much more uncertainty when it comes to like managing a team or business and just the world out there. Who knew there would be a pandemic, right? Often your thinking has to become a lot more probabilistic. And again, without going too deep into the science of it, it's about, I guess, becoming comfortable with uncertainty and knowing that you can't be always right, and being okay with that fact. I think John Maeda has this beautiful quote in what he calls the difference between creative leadership and traditional leadership. Traditional leaders, they want to be right, and creative leaders, they hope to be right. So I think there's a difference between that. And I think the last thing which happens perhaps is uh, even within design leadership, as your scope and remit grows, I think you stop becoming just a design leader and you become a leader, right? You become a business leader almost. Like usually depends on how organizations are set up, but you'll have to work a lot more with non-designers and kind of not like in the comfort zone of design, but in like um, we love to sit at the table. We love to sit at the table, but sometimes that seat can be very uncomfortable, and knowing how you brace for that, I think, is important. So I would say those are some reflections on transition and change.
Yeah, so relatable. I tell you, all the time I was like smiling. I was like, yeah, so true, so true. Thanks.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
I mean, what you talked about, right? Probabilistic, also setting the vision. I mean, given a way to solve a problem. First of all, sometimes the problem doesn't exist. To even understand that what opportunity or what is, a way to go about it. It's so much of vision, so much of way things, take in a direction that definitely no, it's not really deterministic in sense that okay, when you look at a certain problem, it is going to be solved in a certain way.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of transition, right, from craft to leadership in that way. Um, I'd like to understand, like when you were, transitioning from this phase, from like a crafts, like a person who's individual contributor or like in a team, or to getting to a leadership in this course. Um, First of all, like what did you do? Like when this opportunity, that fork came in the road, how did you sort of empower yourself and strengthen yourself to make sure that now you will be responsible for a team? So how did you go about that particular transition?
Yeah. Well, I think like it it should feel like a natural transition, meaning that you should start taking baby steps. It's not going to be one fine day there's just a magic curtain that's lifted and suddenly you're a leader. I think so ultimately leadership is about, a lot of it is about inculcating the right behaviors and attitudes, right? And that can start much early. Like even without a title, you can start showing up as a leader.
Yeah.
One part of leadership is about building trust and building safety, right? Like leaders who can do that create a space where others will thrive. And I think like even when you're in a team of people, there are always opportunities when you can start like going a little bit out of your expected remit of duties and just like being an awesome designer and start thinking about, okay, what are the opportunities that we have, what are the problems that no one is looking at, like how can I help others really. I think that's where you need to start. Like, how can I help others, or how can I make people feel safe, right? Like if you're in a meeting, I don't think it's often, it just has to be the manager who's like accountable for like making sure everyone's inclusive. I think people can take on that role themselves. I think overall, so there's like many dimensions of leadership, right? Like one is the kind of the whole behavioral side. I think the other thing is just strategic thinking, as you said, vision. Um, Often what happens is when you become a leader, the emphasis is a lot on the why and the who. So like, why does this matter to the company and to us? And as a leader of people, like who do you feel are the best people who should be tasked with, you know, taking this forward? And if you believe in the superpowers of your team, if you've hired well, then the what and the how is things actually people figure out. And I think a leader can definitely like mentor and provide feedback and coach. But so in a way, bringing back this idea to how you can start preparing for that, I think it always is worth putting yourself in the shoes of leaders when you're not a lead, when you're not formally a leader, when you're just a practitioner. Like, so I tried doing that. I always used to think when I was doing a design project, like, okay, how is the VP of product thinking about it? Or how is our CEO thinking about it? Like, why does this matter to them? Why does this project matter to our company? Right? And how can you start doing that as just as a natural thing? So like that's more of, I would say, the having a little bit of that product and strategic thinking, and practicing that. The other thing which worked for me is, I feel you need mentors. You need people who are willing to take a chance on it, who are willing to uh, help you, kind of protect you or like give you opportunities early on when you're maybe still not fully prepared to take on a big chunk of responsibility. And I think you can start doing small things like when it comes to people management, let's say, because again, leadership is a lot of things. There's like leadership, and then there's the actual craft of being a manager, right? Like you can be a leader without being a manager, but like often when we say design leader, we are kind of also alluding to the fact that you have a team of people to manage and you have to hire and manage performance and all of those things. I think it's important to start like taking some baby steps towards understanding that as well. It's not a very kind of, it's not talked about in as glorious and sexy terms as like vision and strategy, but I think that's a core part of being a leader, right? Like how do you attract, retain and grow people? And I think some ways I've got a chance to do that was, start small, like maybe play a role in having an intern, get someone in through the doors, even if it's for a small period of time, be their mentor, see how you can help them grow, what happens as a result, reflect on how that made you feel. Is this something you want to do long term for more people? I think early, forming steps of leadership is really about a lot about experimentation and reflection, like
Yeah.
doing all these things that a leader does, but in like small, safe, and kind of ways in which even if you fail, even if you decide it's not for you, that's okay. You learn, and you'll probably be a better uh, individual contributor as a result of that. So I would say those are some things that work for me.
Yeah, I think design leadership entails so many things. that rightly pointed out, it is best if a person wants to start off, it's good to start with the baby steps and maybe look at what are the different ways where people are looking at. And definitely if people are looking at that, I think this talk of yours and this discussion would really help them in that. um, I want to now understand, like, currently you are leading a team in Spotify. So what is the best part of your job? Like, what do you like the most currently in your job?
I think that really gets me excited and energized is overall I mean, one part of it is just the mission of Spotify. I don't know if I've addressed this or if I answered this before, but for me, coming into Spotify and getting to work on a product which was speaking to my own interests and passions of being a musician and a well, I'm not a musician, I'm a music maker. I'm very bad at what I do, but I do uh, get very excited knowing that we are changing something about global music and audio culture. That's kind of, let's get that off the table. That's super exciting. Other than that, I think the part that gets me really excited is seeing great creative work happen. I think that's the best energizer that you can have as a leader, is not necessarily that you are moving the pixels and you're like getting amazing stuff through the shipping, but seeing kind of your team take these super fuzzy, big, ambitious, bold ideas sometimes, uh, and create a few things out of it which are actually meaningful. Um, and I loved being in that process myself when I did that. Now it's also great to kind of sometimes cheer from the side, as they say, like, I'm not the sage on the stage, but the guide from the side, kind of helping guide that process. And it's just amazing when we build these things which reach like millions of people if they're successful, but also seeing how people grow through that journey, right? Like when you do, when you spend like 2 years, 3 years on a team, on a career, you would hope that it's not just about impact, but it's also about growth for you as a person, as an individual, and more creative confidence. Uh, Maybe this person goes on to do amazing things after that, and they are the next leader, right? So it's almost like the circle of life, and for me that is amazing. That is amazing to be part of, and that is super energizing. It's why I chose to be a designer and then a leader in the first place, and hopefully helping more of that, and that infinite game to perpetuate is what I'm excited about.
I'm going to ask you a very tough question. Knowing that your career has spanned over 15 years, I want to understand one of the best, like the best career decision that you've taken.
Yeah, so 15 years with the caveat that I'm counting all the time I've designed.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. Yes, yes.
if
Like
I
all the
take
time
away
you
the
spent.
school years, then maybe like 11 or 12. So
No, no problems. Like, because being in the design, basically, is
yeah,
the, all the what was the best career decision that you've taken?
yeah. So I would say a very key turning point was the decision to go back to school after spending a few years in the industry, right after I got my first job.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people have to take that call. Like some people, they find their calling, or they find themselves in a place where they can keep growing, and that's great. For me, because as I told you, the initial parts were a lot of being confused, but then also like having a lot of questions and doubts and trying to find my own place in the world, kind of thing. So I think going back to school was great. Not for the reasons I thought it would be good, because at that time I thought, did this bachelor's course, which was super wide. We did industrial design and communication design and interaction design and all the things.
Yeah.
It was like a big buffet
Yeah.
of food. And then I kind of started leaning more towards interaction design. And I did a master's on that. I realized interaction design is actually also like 12 different things. So what happened is, from three things, I had hoped to go to one thing, and then it can open up to 12 things. And I think I showed a lot of some of the work or like some of my projects from that period in my portfolio. It's all over the place, right? Let's just be honest about it. But here's why it was interesting, and I call it a great career move because it took me outside of my comfort zone in India and the industry. And I found myself in Denmark, never been in the cold for that long. And um, it helped me connect with people who were actually doing very interesting things in the field. And I think that kind of, yeah, opened a whole new world for me and built a lot of creative confidence, helped me build a body of work, which I started feeling more, confident about.
Yeah.
And I think from there on, again, it's been a little more predictable. Like, okay, you go, you spend some time in a company, you do the work, you see what kind of growth you find. Do you actually? I think later on in the career, for me, initially a lot of it, the focus was that is this cool? Is this something I like? Later on, I started thinking more deeply about are the values of this place right for me? Is this the right environment I want to be in? So it wasn't all of these things weren't obvious in the beginning.
Yeah.
But I have to say the decision to go back to school, then restart my career again was definitely something that in hindsight, uh, a move that worked for me.
It's interesting you say so. Like I ask this question to many of the designers that come on this platform. And last time we had Melissa, who's currently in Meta, and the answer was same. She said the same thing. She said the best career decision of hers was also going to the school. She had done visual arts, and then she actually went into design, master or something like that. Um, and it is also very interesting because in today's time, right, when people say that you can become designer over a weekend or with a boot camp and things like that, right, what really matters, I think, is not just the course curriculum, right, or you learn some processes in a school. I think it's the holistic thought process, the environment, as you talked about, the values of the place, meeting interesting people, the networks, that really matters. So yeah, I think people, if you need a sign, this is it. Look at it. It's not about weekend curriculum that you're looking for, but it's an investment in growing as a person. I would say, like how Shamik talked about, it's about values, it's about understanding. So do take a leap if you are in dilemma what to do. I would say, of course, context is everything. But yeah. um, Now I would also want to understand, like you've been in like so many different places, done so many things, and we've also got into pandemic, and all the things are now in a very different way. So as a designer, and to understand, like you as a person deeply, I would want to understand like how a typical day in your life looks like.
Yeah, how a typical day looks like. So I think right now where I am in life, so I have kids, which means a lot of my day has to be optimized around both me and my wife's days have to be optimized around them. And my day is usually like trying to strike a fine balance between work, my own life, and kind of hobbies and needs, and also family, right? So day starts not super early, but like around 6:37 maybe. Mornings are really about getting the kids up. My son actually started preschool, so I drop him on the preschool on a bike, which is nice because I get to be out and start the day a little bit active. And then when I come back home, I start work at around 9:30 on most days. Um, I I'm a semi-structured person, so of course there are the meetings and all the kind of more concrete agendas and concrete commitments of the week that you're kind of prioritizing. But I try to have like large chunks of time where I can do like deep work. So
Yeah.
either if it's something I need to write, I make sure I block out like 2 hours or something. Or even if it's not to write, but I just need to stay along with a thought, or I have to make an important decision. Like I try to make sure that I can visualize that in my day. Um, so then that's, yeah. So I usually try to do that in the mornings because we work with like different time zones. The afternoons are much busier and heavier with meetings. So like usually like 10 to 12 is where I find a lot of that deep work time happening. Lunch, if I'm working from home, it's just like eat lunch. Someone cooks either the night before or we just do a takeout. Um, Afternoons tend to be a lot of like one-on-ones with people, either my own team or like people from other teams who we need to share context with. Um, the design leadership team in my kind of BU sits across London, New York, and Stockholm. So usually the 3 to 5 window is an inclusive time zone for everyone.
Yeah.
So usually that's reserved for like talking with other design leads and aligning on our plans and making sure that we know what's happening and what's important for us and our team and all of that. I usually try to wrap up work at around like 6 on most days.
Mhm.
And usually my son is back after that, much before that. So he's kept busy with like puzzles and games till 6. So when I'm done in this, so here's the thing: like seasons dictate a lot of my days in Sweden. So in summer, because the daylight can last till like 10 or 11 at night, we have a much longer day.
Yeah.
So we go on like a little nature's walk or some kind of a thing after work. So we have a little forest, so my son loves to go and I go with him, or we just play out for a little bit. 7 to 8 is usually dinner and bedtime for the kids. Once that's done, then it's like dinner and bedtime for us. And usually, if we are still feeling energetic, we might watch something. To be honest, like I don't think I have anything amazingly kind of original about how I structure my day. But as I said, like a lot of it is just like going through, like balancing your needs with the needs of others, right? So um, those 2 or 3 hours that I get is what I kind of try to protect a bit religiously. Like, okay, this is when I have to get stuff done because otherwise you're always like prioritizing others' needs. So, yeah, and I think weekend routines are much more fun. This is like the boring weekday ones. That's when more socializing and yeah, traveling and all
Do
that.
you do any sports? Like, how do you keep healthy? Like,
I
well being.
run sometimes. I run and usually I think so. Yeah, I, I, as I mentioned, I try to bike my son to school, so that's a good morning
Yeah.
workout. I was much more disciplined about like my fitness and running. I think when the pandemic hit like 2 years back, and when we only had one child.
Yeah.
As of last year, we have two. So I didn't even talk about my daughter who's 18. Uh, but that has resulted in some trade-offs when it comes to like time and energy I can dedicate to like my fitness. But it's a lot of like trying to bake fitness into other activities rather than having like a good 1 hour to go to the gym or to run like 5K or 10K or something. But yeah,
And it's almost like a lot of maddening work is happening towards pandemic, right? Like we have like one meeting to another meeting because of work from home. It's not never like you get like time in between. You're just transitioning, right? So how do you keep sane in terms of always keeping on like the energy? Do you like meditate? Do you do something which sort of refreshes you?
I have three things. I have three things. So I always keep a big bottle of water here.
Mhm.
I'm constantly sipping between meetings and during. So I think hydration is important. I have these two guitars behind me, which are in easy access. So if I have like a 10-minute window, I just like take it out, just like try to like switch gears from like work to like a little bit of relaxation and then back to work.
Yeah.
And then I have some like, which you can't see, but I have like a few weights,
Yeah.
dumbbells, which are lying here, which are for like times. Again, as I said, I have to like bake fitness into
In.
my routine rather than like going to a gym. So I have to bring the gym here. And I sometimes like just do some squats or just do some push-ups if I get like 10-20 minutes between things. And
I
if
think.
I'm like stressed, I really need to like divert my attention and
Mhm.
regain my energies. That's a good way to do it.
I think really nice strategies. I would try so. um,
Try it,
that's
see what happens.
Yeah. In this current remote working scenario, what would be your design, advice to the designers, and like how are you and your team coping up with it?
Yeah, it's been hard. Let's just acknowledge that.
Yeah.
It's been hard for everyone across the board. Design is at its heart, as I said, it's a multiplayer game. It's such a collaborative practice that expecting to just like fig jam our way and mural our way and Miro our way through this is kind of trying to be too optimistic.
Hmm.
And like so, a few things, right, which I reflect on now that the pandemic is hopefully a little bit behind us is um I feel like from a leadership standpoint, acknowledging that things are not okay. And let's not lead with a false kind of toxic positivity is important. Like show that you're struggling as a leader. Be vulnerable if because everyone's in the same boat here, right? Like so I think seeing my leaders do that was actually quite refreshing. And I tried to do the same. Secondly, I think from a very like technical standpoint, how do you ensure like what parts of the design day to day can you actually do fairly well using technology? Like, yes, maybe you can still run workshops on using virtual collaboration tools and Zoom. And let's also talk about things which are actually super hard to do in this way. And we really lose a lot of the presence and the context. And I think in the pandemic, even though we knew we were losing those things, it was just super hard to design our way around those just because of health and safety guidelines.
Yeah.
Now, though, what's happening is we are acknowledging that we have the world's tools at our disposal to like make remote work a thing. Let's not lose focus or like let's value the time we also spend with each other. And those will be much fewer and far between now than they used to be 3 4 years back. But when they do happen, let's try to make the most of it. And even if it's like once a quarter or I don't know 3 times a year, let's like really go into those with our full presence, with our full kind of openness and curiosity. And I think belonging is so hard to build remotely, especially if you're joining a new team during this time. We can give them the best onboarding using like all the tools and like um, you can tick all the boxes, but like unless people have lunch together, unless people like do fun things together, unless you build something together, it's hard.
Yeah.
So for me, it's I think the two things to focus on is kind of in the beginning, it's about being open and not trying to like brush this away or like not trying to pretend that this will like fix itself. So the vulnerability aspect, the safety aspect, right? The safety and inclusion aspect of it, like how do you help people feel safe? Safe in terms of how they're doing, but also like um, leading a little bit with. I think again, like this is just such a multi-layered topic, right? Like it's not just about design; it's also about what people are going through and how that
Yeah.
affects their work, right? So how do you how can you still lead with like compassion? And I
Yeah.
think at the highest levels, it's not fine to expect that things will just happen and roadmaps will just get delivered magically. Things will take a hit, and let's just make sure that we have that covered and people can feel safe. And third, I think, is that sense of belonging, right? Like, how do you create that? I think you can go to Spotify to design. A lot of our designers actually created a lot of tools and methods to, for example, run remote sprints and how do you do inclusive onboarding and those things.
Mhm.
Beyond that, now that we are in this hybrid world, let's use more of the FaceTime and the real world uh, sparse moments we have to make the most and build something together in those times. I think those would be the three things I take away from this experience.
Yeah, I think it's still in the shaping currently, right? Like all the things that we are going through, it's still shaping in the way how things will come up. And it's good to hear from you like how you guys are sort of anticipating and taking actions in terms of understanding and acknowledging these factors, and then trying to work towards it. Um, Now let's take a retrospective look at the thing. And now, if there was like one advice that you would want to give to your younger self, what would that be?
Yeah, I think one advice I would give to my younger self would be, uh, so here's the thing, right? I presented you a lot of work today, which it felt like I've never taken myself seriously, or like I had this kind of fate in me figured out. I have to caveat that actually there were times in my career I took myself way too seriously, and I was kind of uh, getting too impatient for like growth pretty early on.
Yeah.
Um, and it felt like validation mattered a lot. Uh, and I think like the advice I would give my younger self is to take it a little bit easy and like spend a little more time wandering in your whatever earlier stages, whatever that happens to be for you. Um, because I think that's where we really discover what's unique about our practice. We are all product designers, UX designers from a title standpoint, but like the way we come up and in the way we approach our craft is always going to be different. And I think like making space for that awareness to come to you is important. And I often felt I didn't do that so well. I was very much leaning on extrinsic measures, extrinsic motivators, and extrinsic validation to shape my journey. Great that I had these moments of realization, and it was not all like lost on me. So you can always like change, and we're all works in progress. But in retrospect, that would be something I would tell myself for sure.
Now, I would like to ask, like a different spin. What would be your advice to current generation, like the young designers who are getting into the field now?
Yeah, hard one. uh, yeah. I mean, I think it's an extension to that idea, I would say. Um, so here's the thing, right? Like, I'll bring a different inspiration to answer this question. I was hearing this podcast by Malcolm Gladwell. He was talking about two different artists in that. One was Cezanne and one was Picasso. And they both had very different approaches to their art and career. Cezanne created a few iconic pieces through his life. So if it were like a 30, 40-year-old career, he made like 5 or 6 world-changing pieces. And Picasso, on the other hand, he might have created 50,000 pieces. And of them, there are 5 or 6 we know, right? I think what he's trying to get at is that if you want to do amazing work, just do a lot of work, which means that do a lot of projects, do a lot of side projects if you want to do. I think like getting too hung up on perfection or quality can be sometimes a little bit limiting. So I think the trick is to just do more, right? And almost make this like a muscle memory for you, like a state of being. And it helps if you're passionate about design in general, or a certain, you don't have to be passionate about everything about design. Maybe it's a small niche of design that you truly enjoy or you care about, but then go deep and just do more in that, right? Like, I think that helps. And often I think the other advice I would give is it's so easy to compare yourself with what you see out there, like
Yeah.
social media on Dribble. Remember that often we are comparing ourselves with the average of all the things we're seeing, and that average doesn't exist, right? And um, how can you kind of, again, and that feels more of like the finite game idea that you have to be the best. You don't have to be the best. You can be really good and really happy and really content with what you're doing without necessarily being the best, right? So don't be the best. Try to find joy and like try to do things which are genuinely like pulling you. I think there are things which are pushed to us that we have to do, and then there are things which pull us that we want to do, right? So how do we find things which we want to do and keep doing more of it? I think that is something that I feel is worth trying. Is something you can take a spin for.
I think, like, what you said just resonated with one of the dialogues. One fine day, my brother gave me an advice. I think I was much in my teenager at that point in time, though. But he told me this statement where he said that don't compare your inside with somebody's outside.
Yeah, wow, that's
So,
profound.
so that stayed with me quite well because, yeah, like outside, people would. It's a projection in the end of the day. So yeah, they totally like resonated with that thought that once he had said to me, which it was like I kept it's always there in my mind. Now,
Yeah,
lastly, we asked a very like a question which we all love to know, and that is the recommendations. Recommendations in terms of any like your favorite books, and it doesn't have to be like specifically from design, but anything that you enjoy.
thank
Books,
God. I don't read a lot of design books, so
no, no, nothing, everything.
that is good.
Like that's why the term I use media. It can be TV series, it can be music, it can be like arts, anything that you like.
Yeah,
Some recommendations that we can explore.
sure. I'm happy to share some recommendations. Um, I love this podcast called Akimbo by Seth Godin.
Mm-hmm.
Seth Godin is like this marketing guru, but generally an amazing thinker and shaper of culture. And he has this podcast called Akimbo.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting 30-minute episodes. He explores like some interesting idea or like something about the world in a lot of depth and humor. So um, gotten a lot of value following that. The other one, which is I'm hoping some people may already listen to this. It's called The Knowledge Project by Shane Parrish. And this is Shane Parrish is this guy who also runs this blog called the fs.blog, Farnham Street blog. And he actually interviews some of the most amazing entrepreneurs and creatives and leaders. And he basically talks to them about how do they think about the world and like what made them successful. And they're I feel like some of these podcasts can be very very hard to digest, and you can get confused like listening to so many different perspectives. I think Shane Parrish, what he does really well is he has those podcasts. He also has this website, which I said, farnhamstreet.blog. He talks about this idea of mental models. He's built a whole repository of mental models that you can
Wow,
use to think about a problem.
nice.
And when you kind of listen to these important, famous, successful people speak and you start connecting the dots to the mental models, that is an interesting way to think about or abstract that knowledge into something useful for you that you can apply, to your work. Um, so those are two podcast recommendations. Book wise, I do read. I don't read a lot of like direct design books, at least now. One book though, which I found quite useful from the design kind of industry is this book by Peter Merholz called Org Design for Design Orgs.
Yeah.
Probably, if you're a design leader,
Yeah.
probably like heard about it or read it. It's a nice book.
Nice book.
Really really talks about aspects which are very useful for companies and designers. The other book, the other topic that I am very interested in right now is climate change and like just trying to understand, like go beyond the marketing and the
Hmm.
media spin of it into like really understanding like the history and like the science and all of that. And the two books I would recommend if you're interested in that space again is
Yeah.
one is called The Uninhabitable Earth, called The Uninhabitable Earth by David Wallace Wells. And the other is by our very own Amitav Ghosh, who's an amazing Indian writer of fiction,
Yeah.
called The Nutmeg's Curse. The first is nonfiction. The second is actually also nonfiction, but written by an amazing fiction writer. So it's very, very engaging and enthralling. Let me see if there's anything else which stands out. Oh yeah, one book for design. If you're curious about things like strategy and like design, like how you connect the dots between design strategy and like business strategy, a really good book is called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy
Mm-hmm.
by Richard Rumelt. I love the thesis of the book. What he says is that most strategy, so to say, in the world is actually bad strategy, meaning that they're not even strategy, they're just slogans. Like, be the best. That's not a strategy, that's a slogan. That's marketing tagline. So what exactly is a strategy? What do we mean by it? And he really kind of goes to like unpack that and gives a lot of amazing examples and case studies. There's a chapter on that book called Design as Strategy, which I found very interesting. So yeah, I think those would be a few which I found useful, and yeah, hopefully you'll find something interesting there.
Thank you so much for these. Like, we really look forward to these because most of our speakers who come and share with us, it has been such an amazing repository to sort of look at these. And most of the designers, like, they would say like, hey, you know what, not only design, I read a lot of other things and stuff like that, and they do give us like a lot of these things. And this has become like one of our what you call favorite way of discovering good content and media and things like that. So thank you for sharing with us this. And yeah, we come to the end of the show, and I would really love to thank you for all the amazing things that you've shared with us today, like your presentation and even like the life journey. I think it's quite inspiring in terms of how you've taken and you've grown as a designer. And for thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today. Here's a small token of love and appreciation for all the good work that you do for inspiring us. um, we confer upon you the title of inspiring designer, and this is just our token of love and appreciation for you. Thank you so much, Shamik, for coming and sharing.
Thank you so much. This means a lot, and yeah, I had so much fun speaking to you today, Kadambari, and your team. And yeah, I mean, sometimes I feel selfishly when you do these kind of things, it helps you build more clarity than others, right? So that has definitely been the case today. Like speaking to you and everyone in your team just brought me more clarity about what I do and what I could be doing better. And yeah, I wish you all the very best. I think we are so lucky to be designers, and
Yeah.
we are so lucky to be designers in 2022, where yes, the world feels like it's breaking apart, or like things are really bad or anything. But I think it's during times like these that new things emerge, like creativity and ideas and art and all of that. So yeah, I'm excited, and I'm rooting for all of you to be amazing designers and for us to be a great, amazing field of practice.
Folks watching us today, I hope this has inspired you, and stay inspired, keep designing. Until next time, thank you guys.